Judge Arthur Engoron on Friday handed Donald Trump his biggest sentence to date, fining the former president $355 million for fraudulently inflating the value of his real estate. Combined with the $83 million judgment against Trump for defamation by E. Jean Carroll, that means Trump has received approximately $438 million in fines over the past 4 weeks. Friday's ruling highlighted how civil lawsuits against Trump continue to significantly harm the former president and threaten his business empire, even as he faces 4 criminal trials, the first of which will begin next month. Engoron found Trump guilty of fraud, conspiracy, and providing false financial statements and false business information, and banned him from serving as a director of a New York company for 3 years. But while Engoron stopped short of completely dismantling the Trump Organization, he released a 93-page statement that described the former president as deplorable and likely to commit fraud again. Their complete lack of remorse and remorse borders on the pathological, Engoron wrote of Trump and his co-defendants. Here's what to know about the ruling. Engoron's fines are largest ever against Trump. The fines, known as discharge or ill-gotten gains, imposed in Engoron's anti-Trump rule are more bigger than any before. The fine imposed on the former president and his company. New York Attorney General Letitia James has asked Engoron to pay Trump and other defendants $370 million in fines, accusing them of a long-running fraud scheme that inflated Trump's assets on his financial statements. That was pretty close. Engoron found that the defendants' fraud saved them about $168 million in interest and fined Trump and his companies that amount. Engoron ruled that Trump and his companies were responsible for $126 million in illegal proceeds from the sale of the old Washington Post Office. The contract, the judge says, was obtained using false SSC financial statements. Condition. And a judge ruled that Trump and his companies are responsible for $60 million in profits from the sale of Ferry Point in the Bronx. Engoron also wrote that Trump will have to pay interest on those payments, which could potentially add $100 million to the total amount he will ultimately have to pay. Additionally, Trump was prohibited from serving as an officer or director of any New York corporation or other entity in New York for 3 years. Engoron gets the last word, and then about Trump repeatedly attacked Engoron and the case during the 11-week trial on social media, outside the courtroom, and even to the judge's face when he testified. Engoron had the last word on Friday, painting Trump as a pathological fraud who won't go away without coercion. Defendants' refusal to admit wrongdoing, perpetuating it, according to the Independent Monitor, leads this court to conclude that they will continue to do so unless legally restrained, Engoron wrote. Engoron acknowledged that Trump's sins, which his lawyers often argued were victimless because banks were repaid and often eager to do business with Trump's company, were not as serious as some crimes. But he blamed Trump and his colleague for a complete lack of remorse. It is a forgivable sin, not a mortal sin. The defendants were not guilty of murder or arson. They didn't rob a bank at gunpoint. Donald Trump is not Bernard Madoff. However, the defendants cannot admit that their ways were wrong. Instead, they adopt a see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, which the evidence denies, the judge wrote. Engoron even turned to poetry to make his point. The English poet Alexander Pope, 1688 to 1744, first proclaimed, "To err is human, to forgive is divine." Prosecutors apparently disagree. Engoron criticized Trump's testimony after the former president largely ignored questions and used the opportunity to make political speeches attacking the case, the attorney general, and the judge. At first, Engoron tried to restrain Trump, even threatening to disqualify the witness at one point, but then relented and let Trump shout his way through the attorney general's questions. In general, Donald Trump rarely answered questions and often engaged in long, irrelevant conversations about matters outside the scope of the trial, Engoron wrote. His refusal to answer questions directly, or in some cases at all, compromised his credibility. Company not facing death penalty as judge refuses to destroy Trump org. Believe it or not, it could be worse for Trump. A judge barred him from serving as an officer or director of a New York company for 3 years, but did not impose a so-called corporate death sentence. In September, Engoron granted summary judgment throwing out Trump's business affidavits, finding Trump and his co-defendants liable for ongoing and repeated fraud.